Hello and welcome. I'm Caroline Woods. Today we're talking about women and the workplace, everything from normalizing support for women, retaining them, and creating a truly inclusive workplace culture. Joining us to discuss is Deloitte's Global Inclusion Leader, Emma Codd. Emma, welcome. So good to have you here with us.
Thank you, Caroline. Great to be here.
And a quick reminder to our audience before we get started, we of course want to hear from all of you. So please type your questions in the chat window. Be sure to take our poll. We'll incorporate the results. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible. But Emma, let's get started by kind of taking a look back and talking about the impact of the pandemic on women in the workplace. What were the key takeaways?
Oh gosh, I think we could probably talk about for the entire session, but I will try and summarize it very briefly. Look, the pandemic was really tough. It was tough on everybody, but obviously this data that we have as Deloitte, we've gathered through our Women at Work survey and actually a pulse survey we did in 2020 during the pandemic, which showed the really massive impact the pandemic had on women in the workplace. And that was everything from what I always describe as the perfect storm of increased responsibilities in the home, whether those be caring responsibilities or just wider than that. And then many of us also saw a massive increase in workload as well. We saw always on culture, we saw women not getting enough support, not feeling supported. And, I suppose, there were many negative things. We saw mental health and mental ill health on the increase, huge stress. However, we did also see some glimpses of what could be the new normal. So we all overnight saw ourselves suddenly, we were forced to work in a way that many of us knew could work for a very long time, but we had to shift to remote working, and that in turn has led to hybrid working. I think the pandemic, yes, it was for all of us, was something that we never want to go through again. But I think these glimpses that we saw, that's within our gift. I said a year ago, hybrid working, it's within our gift to make it a success or make it a complete disaster. I think what we're seeing at the moment, we can talk about this later, is that actually for women, hybrid working isn't working so well, and we can talk about that in a bit.
Yeah, I certainly want to talk about that and some of the new challenges that have been created. But just in terms of the trends that you talked about that we saw really start in 2020, how have those shifted over the last year or two as now we start to kind of come out of the pandemic?
Yeah, and it's really interesting, Caroline. So the most recent Women at Work surveys. This is a survey of 5,000 women across 10 countries. All of these are women in the workplace, varying levels of seniority. The most recent one we published the results in the spring of this year, and it looks back over the previous few months. And actually, there wasn't a huge amount of improvement. And if anything, we saw some worrying trends. So we saw non-inclusive behaviours were on the increase. We'd seen that originally in the 2021 research. We saw over half our respondents said they'd experienced non-inclusive behaviours, harassment or microaggressions in the previous year. We saw that go up to 60% this year. So, that's not good. That's going in the wrong direction. We've seen increased feeling of always being on. Again, that's going in the wrong direction. And it seems that we've sort of kept that always on feeling from during the pandemic. We've seen an increase in women saying that their mental well-being is not where they want it to be as well. We've seen a really significant increase in burnout. And actually, burnout is the top reason that those women that we polled who are looking for a job or at the time of polling were currently looking for another career opportunity, that was their top reason for going. Now, that's a shift from 2021. 2021, burnout didn't feature on the top reasons. So burnout, I know we're all getting to the point where we're all talking about burnout all the time, but this is a severe problem. And then finally, I would say retention. Retention wasn't looking good. Half the women we polled said, I'm going to be in my workplace for less than 2 years. You look 5 years down the road, only 10% of those women actually say that they'll still be with their employer. And then hybrid working. That was the biggie for us. We deliberately wanted to see how hybrid working was making women feel. How was it working in reality? Because all we ever read was this great thing about hybrid working, and the results were worrying. with, over 60% of women saying, look, I've been excluded. I work in a hybrid way and I've been excluded and felt excluded. We have women saying they're now not getting enough access to senior leaders. So look, the trends, unfortunately, they're still going in completely the wrong direction. Something has to change here. And then equally, what we're in danger of doing is piling more complexity on due to what could be an incredible way for us all to work in future.
Okay, so let's dig into the burnout piece, and then we can really talk about what companies need to do to fix this and to solve for it. But just in terms of the burnout, because that to me was the most surprising, although given all of the factors that you've just mentioned, I guess it shouldn't be all that surprising. But what specifically is fueling it, and why should that be a major concern for employers?
Yeah, I mean, look, I can speak from personal experience, and I can speak from, my peers as well. I think we're at this situation where we've sort of got both things still going on. We're still finding our way. We've still got the stress. The pandemic, I had COVID again, 5 weeks ago. The worry of all that is I think still there. We're easing into new ways of working. Many of us are still overwhelmed. Things are really busy there. So I think it's sort of this confluence where things have come together. We've started to go back into the workplace, and then we've started to worry about some of the things that exist. If you look at what burnout effectively is chronic workplace stress that has not been adequately managed. And those are the critical words at the end, has not been adequately managed. And there are many factors that are seen to contribute to burnout being more likely. And the reality is burnout is more likely to happen where your experience does not meet the expectations you were given. And so you have an expectation of transparency, of fairness, of equity, of all these things that we want and we deserve and we're promised. And then often the reality is very, very different. Often as women, we're involved, there's research out there, not by us, but by academic institutions that looks at the sort of tasks that we often get given or are involved in. And those tend to be the less rewardable tasks. And so we're busier and busier. So I think that we're getting to this point where, if organizations don't do something about this, the reality is, look what the data tells you. The data tells you that burnout is the number one reason that people are looking at changing roles. And so organizations, this is not something anymore that an individual is burnt out and we say, or go and do mindfulness. This is down to you. The latest research shows very clearly that burnout is an issue to be solved by an organization, by a team, and by the individual. And I think organizations, need to better consider that.
And that's a great segue into our poll question. So just a reminder to our audience, please respond to the poll question, what you think is the most significant action employers can take to support and retain women in the workforce. We want to hear from you. We also want your questions. So please post your questions and comments in the chat. But Emma, when it comes to what employers need to do, what is it that they need to do to retain female talent?
Oh gosh. Well, okay. So just to go back to the research, and my own personal experience of years of trying to push for gender equality in the workplace. When we asked our respondents, what is the number one thing that your organization could do? The number one response was provide a truly respectful, inclusive culture. And when you look, and one of the things that was really interesting about the research, which gives me a real glimmer of hope here, is a small number of women that we polled are really engaged. They feel as though they have adequate work-life balance. They feel supported. They feel that they're doing the best that they can do within their organization. And when you look at what those organizations, are doing, and the data has shown us that they are providing this inclusive culture. They actually are walking the talk. When they say that gender equality is important to them, they really mean it. And that's evidenced through the actions and through what they're doing when it comes to women that work there. And so from my perspective, I think we've spent many, many years, I have a real bugbear about the sort of let's fix the women. Women do not need fixing. Yes, we all need to, every human being of any gender will have development points that they have to focus on, and that's great. We all want to develop. But I think that too many organizations have taken this fix the women approach, whereby, oh, she's a woman, let's put her on a program to give her more confidence. And that's not what needs to change here. What needs to change here is culture. You look at the non-inclusive behavior data, 60% of women have encountered non-inclusive behaviors. The majority of those is microaggressions. Those are everyday things that have crept in to our culture within the workplace. So if we look at what do we need to do from an organizational perspective, I think the number one thing is let's recognize where the challenges are. Let's listen to the people that work for us, and then let's be willing to really dig deep and to focus on those things that actually need fixing. And the things that do not need fixing are the women.
Let's talk about some of the challenges that hybrid work has created for women, because the pandemic accelerated the shift to remote and hybrid work, which in theory should give people more flexibility, right? But Deloitte's research says that that might not be the case.
Yeah, it's worrying when it comes to hybrid. And I think if we let's look at sort of the two different, in inverted commas, ways of working. So we've got flexible working, which is the sort of traditional, what we've always had, which is, I want to reduce my hours. And that's been around for years. We've been pushing on the benefits of that for everybody for years. And actually, I thought the pandemic would show that, yes, we can be trusted. People can work in a remote way. They can work, they can flex their hours. But that's clearly not the case, because, over 90% of the women that we polled basically said, I wouldn't ask to reduce my hours because my workload wouldn't reduce. And I wouldn't even ask to do that anyway, because guess what? I fear that I'd be judged as a result. People think I wasn't serious about my career. So there's a problem even with the traditional, flexible way of working. And then you move on to hybrid. And the reality of hybrid is it's generally just being in two places. And I think, unfortunately, what's happening, and we can see from the data, from the research, that we are people are inadvertently or being made to feel excluded. And they're not getting the access that's so important to senior leaders. And then you have that awful challenge of proximity bias. So when you're making a decision, you're going to make a decision based on who you see around you, unless you check that bias. So I think it's down to how we lead. I think it's down to organizations. At Deloitte, we've been really clear about that. We have, we've helped people, we've given guidance on, look, this is how you run a remote a hybrid meeting. These are what we call the moments that matter. This is actually giving some predictability to it. You've got so many people saying, I don't even know when I should be in. And I've had that awful moment where I'm the only person that's dialed in to a hybrid meeting. Everyone else has been in the room. And it's that terrible moment where you just think, how could I get this so wrong? And then you sit there and you naturally feel excluded unless somebody works really hard to bring you in. And that's the bit that I think we're struggling with at the moment. And that's the bit that is really easy to fix.
So is it about clearer communication then? So really, what do leaders need to get this right? What do they need to do to get hybrid work for women?
I think leaders, look, clear communication is one of them. I think it's the things that we always should have done and always should do as leaders. It's knowing and understanding your teams. It's knowing and understanding how people are going to work. And then it's making sure that those individuals are still getting exposure to people that it's important for them to get exposure to. It's making sure that when you're running a meeting where you have people who are dialing in and you've got others around the table, it's applying some simple rules that mean that you are including. So that could be always going to somebody that's remote first. It's those sort of really active chairing, and that's harder work than it is if we're all in the room. It is without doubt harder work. But unless we do this, and unless organizations start to really think properly about this, as our data shows, we're just going to build more layers of exclusion. And that's something we can't let happen with something that could be so incredible when it comes to retaining women in the workplace.
Well, I think that's an important point to build on. What are the implications of more women wanting to quit their jobs because because they're burnt out or they don't feel included? What are the broader takeaways here that we may see because of this?
Well, we all know that there's so much research out there that shows that diversity is good for business. I'm sort of, and absolutely, that's, when it comes to gender balance, to gender diversity in the workplace, absolutely. And the reality is, we've worked so hard for years to try and push this forward, and I think we were slowly starting to see progress, and then the pandemic came, and the pandemic knocked everyone in so many ways in their lives. And I think now we do have this, this pivotal moment where we've modernized, we've suddenly had to, we've modernized ways of working. And to me, it's now really important that we take advantage of that we basically enable women to work in the way that works for them, but making sure they're not excluded. And if we don't do that, we're going to lose these women. These are people that we have invested in. These are people that should be progressing within our organization. And yet what they're telling us at the moment, and that the women that we've surveyed, all of whom are non-Deloitte women, so they're women in the wider workplace, they're telling us that, guess what? They're not going to stay. They're going to go. And these are incredible, incredible people that organizations should want to retain. So it's just listening to them, understanding what isn't working about these new ways of working, and then working to try and deal with that.
So we have a comment from Mark. I think it's more of a comment than a question. He says, unequivocally agreed that all inclusive culture must integrate input from all women via surveys or focus group like discussions on a consistent basis for proactive strategies to ensure women are adequately supported at optimal levels. Additionally, employers must be intentional and not receive based on social norms and or themes, but organic implementation for an inclusive workplace and innovation that can also be measured via KPIs where appropriate. Anything you'd like to add to that, Emma?
Yeah, I mean, and Mark is completely right, and this is all women, and something that I did in my own organisation when I was talent leader for Deloitte in the UK, we were not retaining women at critical career points, and we could see the data was really clear, but my whole view, yes, I want data, but I want to listen and I want to understand, because the data doesn't tell you the whole story. And some of the data told us that we were losing some women for, in fact, 50% of the women we were losing were for culture. So to better understand that, what did we do? Well, we listened. And we sat in a room and we got people to talk to us and give us that open and honest views. And they told us that there were some things that we weren't doing right. And that, unequivocally to us showed that we needed to focus on what I called our everyday culture. And we then said, look, if we're getting this wrong, what do? Let's redesign, let's focus on the foundation, which is an always respectful, always inclusive culture. And yes, there are interventions we will need to make, because there are certain points that I used to describe as pain points that we needed to fix, and we needed to be open about that. But the culture change was critical. And that was, as Mark said, listening to all women. We're not, just because we're women, we're not all the same. We don't all have the same experience. Intersectionality plays a huge part as well.
So we have a few minutes left, and you've really driven home some key points, given some really insightful research. But what do you think the key takeaways that business leaders need to walk away with in order to better support and also retain women? What are those key takeaways for them to walk away with, Emma?
So I think the key takeaways are, so number one, we go back to what the data tells us. Let's, and you can't really argue with that data. So number one, non-inclusive behaviors cannot exist within an organization. They should not exist. Microaggressions are, for those that don't know what those are often unintended, seemingly small behaviors that have an adverse impact on someone, often someone who is in a minority. That has to stop. And what also needs to happen is these women, actually anyone of any gender, needs to be able to, if they encounter a microaggression, they need to feel comfortable to report it. Because most of the women in our survey told us they didn't report it. Why didn't they? Fear of career penalty, fear it wouldn't be taken seriously. That has to change. This now more than ever, it has to change. So I think it's addressing that. It's looking at mental health, mental well-being. It's calling it mental health. We have physical health, we have mental health. It's looking at stress and anxiety. It's looking at the causes of that. And then it's making sure that it doesn't get to the point where it's chronic and it's not managed, which obviously is when we're looking at burnout. So it's addressing that. It's making sure that people's experience matches up with their expectations as well. And then I think it's, flexible working. It is ridiculous. We've been talking for so long about flexible working. Seriously, it can't be that difficult to make it work and to trust people. And then finally, hybrid working. This is a golden opportunity. Listen to your women. Listen to those people that work for you. Find out what's working, what isn't. Put together a clear plan as to how to address it. And you will absolutely, you will not regret it. It's those people that don't look at it and don't think about it that will go on to regret it when it comes to the retention of women.
We only have a minute left, Emma, but are you optimistic that we will see change? Because the data is there, the research is there, companies are seeing it happen. I mean, the Great Resignation is here, and it sounds like for women, it might only be getting started. Are you confident that this is something that can be reversed?
Yes, if organisations take it seriously. And I also I have real hope. I see amazing women making it to the top of organisations. I need them to stay at the top of those organisations. I think the more women we have as role models and actually leading organisations, the more this will be taken seriously. And so I am positive. I do think it will change. But it needs, and this can't be down to the women to sort this out. This needs to be all business leaders need to understand that we are at a critical point in time, and we can go one direction, which is backwards, or we can listen to women, to our own employees and to others. We can look at the data and we can take the right steps to go forwards.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Emma, thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise. We really appreciate it. And thank you to Deloitte and to all of you for taking part in this.